The blood on Katherine Bailey's hands had long since dried, but she could still see it every time she closed her eyes, still feel the weight of what she had done pressing down on her chest, like a boulder she would carry until her dying day. She stood at the edge of Salt Lake City, Utah, in the spring of 1878, her worn boots dusty from 3 days of walking, her dress torn at the hem, and her heart shattered into so many pieces she wondered if God himself could ever put it back together. The sun beat down mercilessly as she stumbled toward the first building she could find, a saloon that looked like it had seen better days, much like herself. Inside, the air smelled of whiskey and tobacco, and men turned to stare at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to something darker that made her skin crawl. She kept her head down, approached the bar, and asked in a voice barely above a whisper if they needed anyone to wash dishes or clean floors. The bartender, a grizzled man with more scars than teeth, looked her up and down before jerking his thumb toward the back. She took that as a yes and disappeared into the kitchen before anyone could ask questions she was not ready to answer. That was where Quincy Carlson first saw her, 3 days later when he stopped in for a drink after a long cattle drive from Wyoming. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds gathering over the mountains. At 26 years old, he had built a reputation as one of the best ranch hands in the territory, honest and hard-working, the kind of man other men trusted and women hoped would notice them. But Quincy had never paid much attention to any of that. He focused on his work, saved his money, and dreamed of the day he could buy his own spread of land and build something that would last. He noticed her because she dropped a tray of glasses, and the sound of shattering glass cut through the noise of the saloon like a gunshot. Everyone turned to look, and he saw her standing there frozen, her face pale as winter snow, her hands shaking so badly she had to press them against her apron to make them stop. The bartender started yelling, calling her all sorts of names that made Quincy's jaw tighten, and before he quite knew what he was doing, he stood up and walked over. "How much for the glasses?" he asked, pulling out a handful of coins. The bartender stopped mid-rant and eyed the money. $2. Quincy placed the coins on the bar. "Consider it paid, and maybe go a little easier on your help. We all have bad days." The bartender grunted but took the money, and Katherine looked up at Quincy with eyes the most startling shade of green he had ever seen. They were beautiful eyes, but they were haunted, holding shadows and secrets that made something in his chest twist painfully. She opened her mouth as if to thank him, but no words came out. Instead, she just nodded once and hurried back to the kitchen, disappearing through the doorway like a ghost. Quincy found himself thinking about her for the rest of the day, even when he should have been focused on other things. He had taken a job at the Morrison Ranch just outside of town, working with their herd and helping to prepare for the summer grazing season. The work was demanding, requiring all of his attention, but he kept seeing those green eyes and that haunted expression, wondering what could have happened to put such fear and sadness into a woman who could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old. He went back to the saloon the next evening, telling himself he just wanted a drink after a long day. But his eyes searched for her the moment he walked through the door, and he felt an odd sense of relief when he spotted her carrying a bucket of water toward the back. She moved carefully, as if afraid of drawing attention to herself, and kept her gaze fixed firmly on the floor. He ordered whiskey and nursed it slowly, watching her work and feeling increasingly angry at the way the bartender snapped orders at her, the way some of the other patrons leered. On his third visit, he managed to catch her alone for a moment near the back door. She was taking out trash, her face flushed from the heat of the kitchen, and she nearly dropped the bin when she saw him standing there. "Sorry," he said quickly, holding up his hands. "Did not mean to startle you. I just wanted to make sure you were doing all right, after the other day with the glasses." Katherine stared at him warily, and he could see her calculating whether to run or stay. Finally, she said, "I am fine. Thank you for what you did. I will pay you back when I can." "No need," Quincy said. "Really, I just wanted to check on you." "Why?" The question came out sharp, defensive. "You do not know me." "No, I do not," he admitted. "But you looked like you could use a friend." Something flickered across her face, an emotion he could not quite name, and then she shook her head. "I do not need friends. I need to work and keep my head down and stay out of trouble. Now, if you will excuse me, I have things to do." She brushed past him and went back inside, leaving him standing in the alley feeling foolish and oddly disappointed. But Quincy was not the kind of man who gave up easily. Over the next 2 weeks, he made it a point to stop by the saloon every few days. He never pushed, never tried to corner her or force a conversation. He just made sure she saw him, made sure she knew that if she needed anything, he was there. Slowly, gradually, she began to relax around him. It started with small things, a nod of acknowledgement when he came in, a brief word of thanks when he left a generous tip that he made sure the bartender knew was specifically for her good service. Once, he thought he even saw the ghost of a smile when he made a joke about the terrible quality of the saloon's coffee. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening in late May. Quincy had just finished his drink and was preparing to head back to the ranch when he heard raised voices from the kitchen. He recognized Catherine's voice, high and frightened, and then a man's voice, rough and aggressive. Without thinking, he pushed through the kitchen door and found one of the saloon's regular patrons, a man named Dutch Harrigan, who had a reputation for being mean when he drank, backing Katherine into a corner. "I said I want some company," Dutch was saying, his hand reaching for her arm, "and you are going to give it to me." "Get away from her," Quincy said, his voice low and dangerous. Dutch turned, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. "This is none of your business, Carlson. I am making it my business. Step away from her, now." For a moment, Quincy thought Dutch might actually take a swing at him. His hand hovered near the gun at his hip, and the air between them crackled with tension. But Dutch must have seen something in Quincy's eyes that made him reconsider, because he spat on the floor and shoved past him, muttering curses under his breath. Quincy waited until he heard the front door slam before turning to Katherine. She was pressed against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself, her whole body trembling. He took a careful step toward her, moving slowly as he might approach a frightened horse. "It is all right," he said gently. "He is gone. You are safe." "Safe," she repeated, and then she laughed, a broken sound that had no humor in it. "I have not been safe since I was 16 years old. I will never be safe again." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with pain and history. Quincy wanted to ask what she meant, wanted to know what had happened to her, but he knew better than to push. Instead, he said, "Let me walk you home, wherever you were staying, just to make sure Dutch does not try to follow you." She looked at him for a long moment, those green eyes searching his face, as if trying to determine whether she could trust him. Finally, she nodded. "All right, but just to the door, that is all." "That is all," he agreed. She lived in a boarding house on the edge of town, a shabby building that had probably been white once, but had faded to a dingy gray. They walked in silence most of the way, their footsteps echoing on the wooden sidewalks. The evening air was cool and pleasant, carrying the scent of sage from the surrounding hills. When they reached her door, Katherine turned to face him. "Thank you," she said. "Again. You seem to make a habit of rescuing me." "I do not mind," Quincy said honestly, "though I wish you did not need rescuing so often." She looked down at her hands, and he saw her fingers twist together nervously. "You should not be kind to me. You should not waste your time on me. I am not worth it." The words were said so matter-of-factly, with such complete conviction, that they hit Quincy like a physical blow. He stared at her, at this beautiful wounded woman who believed herself to be worthless, and felt something shift inside his chest, something he had not expected and was not prepared for, but that felt as inevitable as the sunrise. "Katherine," he said, using her name for the first time. He had learned it from the bartender. "Look at me." She raised her eyes reluctantly, and he saw tears gathering in them, threatening to spill over. "I do not know what happened to you," he said. "I do not know what you have been through or what you think you have done. But I know this. You are wrong. You are worth it. And if you will let me, I would like to spend my life proving that to you." The tears spilled over then, running down her cheeks in silver tracks. She shook her head violently. "You do not understand. You do not know what I have done. If you knew, you would run from me as fast as you could. You would never look at me the way you are looking at me right now." "Then tell me," Quincy said. "Tell me what happened. Let me decide for myself." For a moment, he thought she might actually do it. Her mouth opened, and he could see her struggling with the words, with the weight of whatever secret she carried. But then she shook her head again and stepped back toward the door. "I cannot. I am sorry. Please just forget about me. Find some nice girl who can give you the life you deserve. I am not that girl. I will never be that girl." She disappeared inside before he could respond, and he heard the sound of a lock clicking into place. Quincy stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, before finally turning and walking back toward the livery stable where he had left his horse. But he did not forget about her. He could not. Over the following weeks, he continued to visit the saloon, continued to watch over her as best he could. He learned her routines, learned that she worked from dawn until late at night, that she kept entirely to herself and never socialized with the other employees. He learned that she ate very little and that she looked increasingly tired and worn down as the days passed. He also learned, through careful questions and paying attention to saloon gossip, that she had arrived in Salt Lake City with nothing but the clothes on her back and a past she refused to discuss. Some people said she was running from the law. Others claimed she was a widow, fleeing from her late husband's debts. A few whispered darker things, things that made Quincy's hands clench into fists. He did not care what she had done. That realization came to him one night as he lay in his bunk at the ranch, staring up at the ceiling and thinking about her. Whatever had happened in her past, whatever she thought made her unworthy of kindness or love, it did not matter to him. What mattered was the woman she was now, the woman he saw struggling to survive with a quiet dignity that broke his heart. He was falling in love with her. The knowledge should have terrified him, but instead, it felt right. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. In early June, everything changed. Quincy arrived at the saloon one evening to find it in an uproar. The bartender was shouting about missing money, and Katherine stood in the center of the room with all eyes on her, her face white as chalk. "I did not take it," she was saying, her voice shaking. "I would never steal from you." "You are the only one who had access to the office," the bartender snarled. $20 is missing, and you are the thief. I am fetching the sheriff." "No," Katherine said, and there was pure panic in her voice now. "No, please. I did not take your money, but you cannot bring the sheriff here. Please." The desperation in her tone told Quincy everything he needed to know. She was running from something, and involving the law would expose her to whatever or whoever she was hiding from. He stepped forward without hesitation. "How much is missing?" he asked. $20, the bartender repeated, "and she is the one who took it." "I will pay you $40 right now," Quincy said. 20 for what is missing, and 20 more for her wages through the end of the month. And then she is done working here. Everyone turned to stare at him. The bartender's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Why would you do that if she is not stealing for you?" "Because I need someone to help out at the Morrison Ranch," Quincy lied smoothly. "Cook and clean and help with the household work. Katherine here has been doing a fine job, and I have been meaning to offer her better employment. This seems like a good time." It was a flimsy excuse, and he could see several people looking skeptical, but the bartender only cared about the money. Quincy counted out the coins, watching as the man's greedy eyes tracked everyone. When the payment was complete, he turned to Katherine. "Get your things," he said quietly. "You are coming with me." She looked like she wanted to argue, wanted to refuse, but she must have known she had no other choice. She disappeared into the back and emerged a few minutes later with a small carpet bag that appeared to contain everything she owned in the world. They walked out of the saloon together, and Quincy could feel every eye in the place following them. Once they were outside, Katherine stopped and turned to face him. "I did not steal that money." "I know," Quincy said. "How do you know?" "Because I know you, and because even if you had, I would not care." She stared at him, and he could see she was struggling not to cry. "Why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep helping me? I told you I am not worth it." "And I told you I want to spend my life proving that you are," Quincy said. "I meant it. You do not even know me. You do not know what I have done." "Then tell me," he said again. "Tell me your story, Katherine. Let me in." They were standing in the middle of the street, the evening shadows lengthening around them. Katherine looked up at him, and he could see the war playing out on her face, the desperate need to trust battling against the fear that had kept her isolated for so long. Finally, something seemed to break inside her, and she sagged slightly. "Not here," she whispered. "Not where people can hear." Quincy looked around and spotted a small church at the end of the street, its door standing open to catch the evening breeze. "There," he said. "Will that work?" She nodded, and they walked to the church in silence. Inside, it was cool and quiet, with simple wooden pews and a plain altar at the front. They sat down in the back row, and for a long moment, Katherine just stared at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft he had to lean closer to hear her. "My name is Katherine Bailey. I am 22 years old, and I killed a man when I was 19. Quincy felt his breath catch, but he did not interrupt, did not pull away. He just waited for her to continue. "I grew up in Missouri," she said. "My father was a farmer, and my mother died when I was young. It was just the two of us for a long time. He was a good man, my father, kind and gentle. He taught me to read and write and to see the good in people." Her voice cracked slightly. "That last part almost got me killed. When I was 18, a man came to our farm. His name was Robert Thorne, and he was charming and handsome and said all the right things. My father did not trust him, but I was young and stupid and thought I knew better. Robert courted me for 6 months, and I fell in love with him. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes." She paused, and Quincy saw her hands clench into fists on her lap. "My father objected. He said there was something wrong about Robert, something dark he was hiding. We argued terribly. It was the first time I had ever truly fought with my father. I said horrible things to him, things I can never take back, and then I married Robert anyway. For the first month, everything was perfect. Robert was attentive and loving and everything I had dreamed of. But then things started to change. He became controlling, did not want me to see my father or any of my old friends. He started drinking heavily, and when he drank, he became violent. Quincy felt rage building inside him, hot and fierce, but he kept his voice calm. "He hurt you." "He did more than hurt me," Katherine said, and there was such emptiness in her voice that it scared him. "He beat me regularly. He told me I was worthless, that I was lucky he had married me because no one else would ever want me. He controlled every aspect of my life, what I wore, what I ate, when I was allowed to speak. And when I tried to leave, when I tried to go back to my father, he found me and dragged me back and broke my arm." She pulled up her left sleeve, and Quincy saw a faint scar running along her forearm, where the bone had clearly not healed properly. "I lived like that for almost a year," Katherine continued. "I thought about ending my own life more times than I can count. The only thing that stopped me was thinking about my father, about how it would destroy him to lose me like that. I kept hoping that somehow, some way, I would find a way out. And then my father got sick. Pneumonia. I got word from a neighbor, and I begged Robert to let me go see him. He refused, said my father had made his choice when he objected to our marriage, and I had made mine. He locked me in our house and left town on business. I broke a window to get out. I ran all the way to my father's farm, but I was too late. He had died 3 days earlier. They had already buried him." Her voice broke completely then, and tears streamed down her face. "I never got to say goodbye. I never got to tell him I was sorry, that he was right about everything, that I loved him." Quincy reached out slowly and took her hand. She gripped his fingers so tightly it almost hurt, but he did not pull away. "Robert found me at my father's grave," Katherine said. "He was furious that I had escaped. He dragged me back to our house, and he beat me worse than he ever had before. He said he was going to kill me, that I was not worth the trouble I caused, and I believed him. I could see it in his eyes. He was going to beat me to death, and there was nothing I could do to stop him. But then he passed out. He had been drinking, and the exertion of hitting me over and over finally caught up with him. He just collapsed on the floor and started snoring, and I stood there looking at him, and something inside me just snapped. I was so tired of being afraid, of being hurt, of living in hell every single day. I thought about running, but I knew he would find me again. He always found me. There was a cast iron pan on the stove. I picked it up and I hit him with it, just once. But it was enough." She was shaking now, her whole body trembling with the weight of the memory. Quincy wanted to pull her into his arms, but he sensed she needed to finish the story first. He died instantly. There was so much blood. I stood there for hours, just staring at him, unable to believe what I had done. I had killed him. I was a murderer. Eventually, I realized I had to leave. If anyone found out what had happened, they would hang me. So I cleaned myself up as best I could, took what little money there was in the house, and I ran. I have been running ever since." She finally turned to look at him, and the anguish in her eyes was almost unbearable. "So now you know. Now you know what I am. I am a killer, I took a man's life. It does not matter that he was cruel or that I was defending myself. I ended him, and I can never undo that. That is why I am not worth it, Quincy. That is why you need to walk away from me and never look back." Quincy sat in silence for a long moment, processing everything she had told him. He thought about her father, about a young woman who had made a mistake and paid for it in the cruelest way possible. He thought about a monster named Robert Thorne, who had brutalized and tormented an innocent person until she had no choice but to fight back. And he thought about Katherine, about the courage it must have taken to survive all of that and keep going. "You did not murder him," Quincy said finally. "You defended yourself. There is a difference." "The law would not see it that way," Katherine said bitterly. "A wife who kills her husband is a murderer, no matter what he did to her." "Maybe," Quincy said, "but I am not the law, and I know what I see when I look at you. I see a woman who survived something terrible. I see someone who is strong and brave and who deserves so much better than what life has given her. I see someone worth fighting for." "How can you say that?" Katherine whispered. "How can you look at me and not see the blood on my hands?" "Because I see everything else, too," Quincy said. He cupped her face gently in his hands, using his thumbs to wipe away her tears. "I see your kindness, even after everything that happened to you. I see the way you work hard and never complain. I see the way you try to make yourself invisible because you are so afraid of being hurt again. And it breaks my heart, Katherine. It breaks my heart that someone as good as you believes herself to be worthless." "I am not good," she said, but there was less conviction in her voice now. "You are," Quincy insisted. "You are good and worthy and deserving of love, and I will spend every day for the rest of my life proving that to you, if you will let me. I will keep you safe. I will make sure no one ever hurts you again. I will show you that there are still good things in this world, still reasons to hope and dream and live. Just give me a chance, Katherine. Please." She stared at him, and he could see the longing in her eyes, the desperate desire to believe him, warring with the fear and self-hatred that had been her constant companions for so long. "What if someone finds out about Robert? What if the law comes looking for me?" "Then we will deal with it together," Quincy said. "I will not let you face it alone. I promise you that." "Why?" she asked again. "Why would you risk everything for me?" "Because I love you," Quincy said, and the words felt right, felt true. "I have loved you since the first moment I saw you drop those glasses and look up at me with those beautiful green eyes. I have loved you through every conversation, every moment I have spent worrying about you and wanting to protect you. And I will love you for the rest of my days, Katherine Bailey, if you will have me." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different somehow, softer. "I do not know how to be loved. I do not know if I remember how." "Then I will teach you," Quincy said. "We will learn together, one day at a time. What do you say?" Katherine looked at him for a long moment, and then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay. I will try. I will try to trust you. I will try to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could be worth something after all." Quincy smiled, and then he did what he had been wanting to do for weeks. He leaned in and kissed her, soft and gentle and full of promise. Katherine stiffened at first, clearly not expecting it, but then she relaxed and kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest tentatively on his chest. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Quincy could see something new in Katherine's eyes. Hope, fragile and uncertain, but unmistakably there. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Quincy said, "we figure out our future, together." The first challenge was practical. Katherine needed a place to stay, and Quincy's bunk at the Morrison Ranch was obviously not suitable. After some discussion, they decided that Katherine would rent a room at a different boarding house, one on the respectable side of town, run by a widow named Mrs. Pemberton. Quincy paid for a month in advance, ignoring Katherine's protests that she could not accept his charity. "It is not charity," he told her firmly. "It is an investment in our future. Besides, I need you somewhere safe and comfortable while we figure out the rest." Mrs. Pemberton turned out to be a round, cheerful woman in her 50s, who asked no questions and seemed genuinely pleased to have Katherine as a tenant. She showed Katherine to a small but clean room on the second floor, with a window that looked out over the street and a bed with a real feather mattress. Katherine stood in the doorway, staring at it with an expression of disbelief. I have not had a room to myself in 3 years, she said quietly. Quincy came up behind her and rested his hands on her shoulders. Well, now you do, and you will never have to share it with anyone unless you choose to. She turned to look at him, and he could see the gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you, she said, for everything. I do not know how I will ever repay you. You do not need to repay me, Quincy said. Just be here. Just give us a chance. That is all I ask. Over the following weeks, they began to build something together. Quincy came to visit Katherine every day after work, sometimes bringing her food or small gifts. Other times just sitting with her and talking. They took walks around town, ignoring the curious stares and whispered gossip. They had dinner together at the small restaurant near the boarding house. They went to church on Sundays, sitting in the back row and holding hands while the preacher talked about redemption and grace. Slowly, Katherine began to open up. She told him more about her childhood, about happy memories with her father before everything went wrong. She talked about her mother, whom she barely remembered but had loved deeply. She shared her dreams, small and hesitant at first, but growing bolder as time passed. She wanted to have a garden someday. She wanted to learn to bake bread. She wanted to wake up in the morning without fear. Quincy shared his own dreams in return. He told her about the ranch he wanted to build, about raising cattle and horses in the wide open spaces of Utah. He talked about the house he would construct, solid and strong, with big windows to let in the light and a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. He painted a picture of a life filled with simple joys and honest work, and he could see the longing in Katherine's eyes as she listened. "Do you really think we could have that?" she asked one evening as they sat on a bench outside the boarding house, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Do you think it is possible for someone like me to have a normal, happy life?" "I do not think it," Quincy said. "I know it. You deserve happiness, Katherine. You deserve everything good this world has to offer, and I am going to make sure you get it." She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. They sat like that for a long time, neither of them speaking, just enjoying the quiet comfort of being together. But their peace was not destined to last. In late July, a stranger arrived in Salt Lake City. He was a tall man with cold eyes and a badge on his chest that identified him as a deputy marshal from Missouri. His name was Thomas Crane, and he was asking questions about a woman who had disappeared 3 years earlier after her husband was found dead in their home. Quincy heard about it from one of the other ranch hands who mentioned it casually over breakfast. His blood ran cold, and as soon as he could get away, he rode into town to warn Katherine. He found her in her room, sitting by the window with some mending in her lap, and the moment she saw his face, she knew something was wrong. "What is it?" she asked, setting aside her sewing. "There is a marshal in town," Quincy said without preamble. "He is looking for you." Katherine went white. "How do you know?" "He has been asking around about a woman matching your description. He has not mentioned you by name yet, but it is only a matter of time. Katherine, we need to leave. We need to get out of Salt Lake City before he finds you." "Where would we go?" Katherine asked, and he could hear the panic rising in her voice. "He will just follow us. The law does not give up." "Then we go somewhere the law cannot reach," Quincy said. "Somewhere remote, where we can disappear. I have some money saved. It is enough to get us started. We can head north, up into the mountains. Find a place to build our own ranch, far from towns and sheriffs and people asking questions." Katherine stared at him. "You would do that? You would give up everything and run with me?" "I would do anything for you," Quincy said. "I thought I had made that clear by now." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. Quincy could see her shoulders trembling. "If we run, we will always be running. We will never be able to stop looking over our shoulders. Is that really the life you want?" "I want whatever life includes you," Quincy said. He went to her and turned her gently to face him. "Katherine, listen to me. I do not care about the ranch or the house or any of it. The only thing I care about is you. We can build a life anywhere, as long as we are together. So, yes, I want to run. I want to take you away from here and keep you safe. That is all I want." Tears slid down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I think I am the lucky one," Quincy said, and he kissed her softly. They made plans to leave the next morning before sunrise. Quincy would gather supplies and horses. and Katherine would pack what few belongings she had. They would head north toward the wilderness, following old trappers' trails into the high country where few people ventured. It was risky, and the journey would be hard, but it was their best chance. That night, Quincy lay in his bunk unable to sleep, thinking about everything they were about to do. He was giving up the job he loved, the stability he had worked so hard to achieve, the dream of owning his own spread of land in a proper, established way. But none of that mattered compared to Katherine. She was worth any sacrifice, any hardship. He would prove that to her, every single day for the rest of their lives. He was just starting to drift off when he heard voices outside. Curious, he got up and looked out the window. In the yard below, he could see the ranch foreman talking to someone. The visitor had his back turned, but there was something about his posture, his bearing, that made Quincy's stomach clench. And then the man turned slightly, and Quincy saw the glint of a badge in the moonlight. The marshal had come to the ranch. He was asking questions right now, probably about Quincy, about whether anyone had noticed him spending time with a woman matching Katherine's description. Quincy dressed quickly and slipped out the back, moving quietly through the shadows. He had to get to Katherine, had to warn her. They could not wait until morning. They had to leave now. He saddled 2 horses, working as quickly and quietly as he could, and loaded them with supplies he had been gradually stockpiling over the past few days. Then he rode hard for town, his heart pounding in his chest. When he reached the boarding house, he threw stones at Katherine's window until she appeared, looking alarmed. "We have to go," he called up in a loud whisper. "Right now, the marshal is at the ranch asking about us." Katherine disappeared from the window and reappeared a few minutes later at the front door, her carpetbag in hand. She had thrown a shawl over her nightgown, and her hair was loose around her shoulders. Quincy helped her onto one of the horses, and then they were riding out of Salt Lake City as fast as they dared without attracting attention. They rode through the night, following the old emigrant road north toward the mountains. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, they finally slowed to let the horses rest. Quincy looked back the way they had come, but there was no sign of pursuit, not yet anyway. "How far do we need to go?" Katherine asked. She looked exhausted, her face pale in the early morning light. "As far as it takes," Quincy said. "There are valleys up in the high country, places so remote that no one bothers going there. We can find one of those and start over. Build a cabin, raise some cattle, live simply. It will be hard work, but we will manage." Katherine nodded, though he could see the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. He reached over and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I promise you," he said, "everything is going to be all right. I will take care of you. I will keep you safe. You just have to trust me." "I do trust you," Katherine said. "That is the remarkable part. I did not think I would ever trust anyone again, but I trust you completely." They rode on, climbing higher into the mountains as the day grew warmer. The landscape changed around them, the scrubby desert vegetation giving way to pine forests and meadows filled with wildflowers. They passed streams running clear and cold with snowmelt, and Quincy showed Katherine how to catch fish with her bare hands the way his father had taught him as a boy. They ate sitting on the bank of a stream, the fish fresh and sweet, and despite everything, Katherine laughed. "What is funny?" Quincy asked. "This," Katherine said, gesturing around them. "All of this. A week ago, I was washing dishes in a saloon and thinking I would probably die there, alone and forgotten. And now, I am sitting by a stream in the mountains with a man who says he loves me, eating fish we caught ourselves, running from the law like outlaws in a dime novel. It is absurd, it is terrifying, and somehow, it is the happiest I have been in years." Quincy smiled. "Well, I am glad to hear that. Though I would prefer you think of us less as outlaws and more as adventurers seeking our fortune." "Adventurers," Katherine repeated, trying out the word. "I like that. Yes, we are adventurers." They traveled for 3 more days, moving deeper into the wilderness. At night, they made camp and slept under the stars, with Quincy keeping watch to make sure no one had followed them. Katherine slept fitfully at first, clearly still afraid, but gradually she began to relax. Being away from civilization, from the constant threat of discovery, seemed to ease some of the tension she had been carrying. On the 4th day, they found it, a valley nestled between 2 peaks, with a stream running through it and meadows perfect for grazing. There was timber for building and plenty of game for hunting. It was isolated and beautiful, exactly what they needed. "This is it," Quincy said, looking around with satisfaction. "This is where we will build our home." Katherine slid down from her horse and walked slowly through the meadow, her fingers trailing through the tall grass. "It is beautiful," she said softly. "It is like something out of a dream." "Then let us make the dream real," Quincy said. They set to work immediately. Quincy had brought an axe and basic tools, and he began felling trees to build a cabin. Katherine helped as best she could, dragging branches and gathering stones for a foundation. The work was backbreaking, and they fell into their bedrolls each night exhausted and aching. But there was also a sense of satisfaction, of building something together that made it all worthwhile. As they worked, they talked. Katherine told Quincy more about her life before Robert, about the books she had loved to read and the dreams she had once had of becoming a teacher. Quincy shared stories from his childhood, about growing up on his family's small ranch in Wyoming before his parents died and he set out on his own. They learned each other's rhythms, learned how to work together, learned how to communicate without words. And slowly, day by day, Katherine began to heal. Quincy could see it in the way she smiled more readily, in the way the haunted look gradually faded from her eyes. She still had nightmares sometimes, waking in the middle of the night with tears streaming down her face, and Quincy would hold her and whisper soothing words until she calmed. But the good days began to outnumber the bad, and that gave him hope. It took them nearly a month to finish the cabin. It was small and rough, nothing like the grand house Quincy had once dreamed of building, but it was solid and weatherproof, with a stone fireplace and a door that locked securely. The day they moved in, Katherine stood in the center of the single room and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "It is ours," she said wonderingly. "Really, truly ours. No one can take it away from us." "No one," Quincy agreed. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, long and deep, pouring all of his love and commitment into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and he could see desire flickering in Katherine's eyes. "Quincy," she said hesitantly, "I want to be with you, properly, as your wife." "Are you sure?" Quincy asked. He wanted nothing more, had dreamed of it countless nights, but he would not push her. "We do not have to rush. We can wait as long as you need." "I am sure," Katherine said. "I want to leave the past behind. I want to start our new life together, in every way. Will you marry me, Quincy Carlson?" Quincy laughed, surprised and delighted. "I think I am supposed to be the one asking you that question." "Well, I am asking you," Katherine said, her chin lifting defiantly. "I may not be able to give you a church wedding or a proper ceremony, but I can give you my heart and my life. So, what do you say, Cowboy? Will you have me?" "Yes," Quincy said without hesitation. "Yes, Katherine Bailey, I will marry you, today, tomorrow, forever. Yes." They spoke their vows there in their little cabin, with no witnesses except the mountains and the sky. Quincy promised to love and cherish Katherine for all his days, to protect her and provide for her and make her laugh. Katherine promised to trust him, to let him prove her worth to her, to build a life with him filled with joy and purpose. They sealed their promises with a kiss, and then Quincy carried her to the bed he had built with his own hands, and they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left both of them trembling. Afterward, they lay tangled together under a quilt Katherine had made from scraps of fabric, and Quincy traced patterns on her bare shoulder with his fingertips. "I love you," he said. "I need you to know that. I need you to believe it." "I am starting to," Katherine said. "Every day, I believe it a little more. You are patient with me, Quincy, more patient than I deserve." "You deserve everything good," Quincy said. "When will you accept that?" "Maybe never completely," Katherine admitted. "But I am trying. For you. For us. I am really trying." "That is all I can ask," Quincy said, and he kissed her again. They fell into a routine over the following months. Quincy hunted and fished and tended to the small garden Katherine had planted near the cabin. Katherine cooked and cleaned and continued to improve their little home, making curtains and rugs and all the small touches that transformed the rough cabin into something that felt warm and welcoming. They worked hard, but they also took time to enjoy the beauty around them, to explore the valley and the surrounding mountains, to simply be together. As autumn approached and the leaves began to turn gold and red, Quincy realized that Katherine was changing. She smiled more freely now, laughed more often. The shadows in her eyes had not disappeared completely, but they had receded significantly. She moved with more confidence, no longer flinching at sudden noises or looking over her shoulder constantly. She was becoming the woman she was always meant to be, before life and cruelty had tried to break her. One evening in late September, they sat outside the cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Katherine was leaning against Quincy, his arm around her shoulders, and she had a peaceful expression on her face. "I never thought I could be this happy," she said quietly. "After everything that happened, I thought I was broken beyond repair. But you have helped me put the pieces back together, Quincy. You have given me a reason to hope again." "You were never broken," Quincy said. "You were wounded, but you were never broken. You are the strongest person I know, Katherine Carlson." Katherine turned to look at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Say it again." "Katherine Carlson," Quincy repeated, understanding what she needed to hear. "My wife, my love, my everything." She kissed him then, deep and sweet, and he could taste the salt of happy tears on her lips. As the weather grew colder and the first snows began to fall, they prepared for winter. Quincy spent long days cutting firewood and hunting deer and elk to store in the small smokehouse he had built behind the cabin. Katherine preserved vegetables from the garden and made warm clothing from the hides Quincy brought home. They worked together to insulate the cabin and ensure they would be comfortable during the harsh mountain winter. On the first truly cold night, when the wind howled outside and snow fell thick and fast, they curled up together in front of the fireplace. Katherine rested her hand on her stomach, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "What are you thinking about?" Quincy asked. "I am thinking that I have something to tell you," Katherine said. "Something important." Quincy sat up straighter, suddenly worried. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am more than all right," Katherine said. "I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Quincy could only stare at her, the words not quite registering. Then the meaning sank in, and a huge grin spread across his face. "A baby? Really? Are you certain?" "I am certain," Katherine said. "I suspected for a few weeks, but I wanted to be sure before I told you. We are going to have a child, Quincy. You are going to be a father." Quincy let out a whoop of joy and pulled Katherine into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop before he made her dizzy. He set her down carefully, as if she were made of glass, and cupped her face in his hands. "This is the best news I have ever received," he said. "A baby, our baby. I cannot believe it." "Are you happy?" Katherine asked, though the answer was obvious from his expression. "I am more than happy," Quincy said. "I am overjoyed. I am blessed. I am the luckiest man in the world." He paused, his expression becoming more serious. "Are you happy? I know this means new responsibilities, new challenges. Is this something you want?" "More than anything," Katherine said. "I was terrified when I first realized. Terrified that I would not be a good mother, that I would somehow damage our child the way I was damaged. But then I thought about you, about the kind of father you will be, and I knew everything would be all right. We can do this together, Quincy. We can raise a child and give them the love and stability we both wanted for ourselves." "Yes, we can," Quincy agreed. "And we will. I promise you, Katherine, our child will grow up knowing nothing but love. They will never feel unwanted or worthless. They will know they are cherished every single day of their lives." Katherine rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real, that I have you, that I have this life. It feels too good to be true." "It is real," Quincy assured her, "and it is going to keep getting better. Just you wait and see." The winter passed slowly, with heavy snows that sometimes kept them confined to the cabin for days at a time. But they did not mind. They had each other, and they had plans to make for their growing family. Quincy started building a cradle from smooth pine wood, carving intricate designs into the headboard. Katherine sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands gentle and sure. They talked about names and what kind of parents they wanted to be. They discussed how to expand the cabin to make room for more children, because both of them agreed they wanted a large family. They dreamed aloud about the future, painting pictures with words of birthday celebrations and holidays and all the small joys of watching a child grow. As the snow began to melt and spring arrived, Katherine's belly grew round and full. Quincy watched over her constantly, always ready to help her with anything she needed, sometimes to the point of being overprotective. Katherine tolerated his hovering with good humor, understanding that it came from a place of love and concern. In early May, as the meadows filled with wildflowers and the world turned green again, Katherine went into labor. Quincy had been preparing for this moment for months, reading every medical book he could find and talking to the midwife in the nearest town during a supply run. But when the time came, he found himself terrified. "What if something goes wrong?" he asked Katherine as he helped her to the bed. "What if I do something wrong?" "You will not," Katherine said, though her face was tight with pain. "You have never let me down before, and you will not start now. We can do this, Quincy. Together." The labor was long and difficult. Katherine was strong, but bringing a child into the world was hard work, and Quincy felt helpless watching her struggle. He held her hand and wiped her forehead and whispered words of encouragement, wishing there was more he could do. Just when he was starting to think they should have stayed closer to civilization, closer to proper medical help, he heard the most beautiful sound in the world. A baby's cry, strong and healthy and full of life. With shaking hands, Quincy delivered his son into the world. The baby was red-faced and squalling, perfect in every way. He cleaned the child carefully and wrapped him in a soft blanket Katherine had made, then placed him in his mother's arms. Katherine looked down at their son with tears streaming down her face. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "Quincy, look at what we made. Look at this perfect, beautiful boy." Quincy sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Katherine, both of them staring in wonder at their son. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at them with dark, serious eyes, as if trying to figure out who these people were. "What should we name him?" Quincy asked. Katherine was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "James, after my father. I want to honor his memory, to show that I never forgot him, even though I never got to say goodbye. James Carlson. What do you think?" "I think it is perfect," Quincy said. "James Carlson, welcome to the world, little man. Your mother and I are going to love you more than you can possibly imagine." The first few weeks with James were chaotic and exhausting. The baby needed constant attention, feeding and changing and comforting at all hours. Katherine was recovering from the birth, and Quincy took on extra work to make sure she could rest as much as possible. But despite the challenges, they were happier than they had ever been. James was a constant source of wonder and joy, and watching Katherine with their son made Quincy fall even more deeply in love with her. She was a natural mother, patient and nurturing, singing lullabies in a soft, sweet voice, and rocking James for hours when he was fussy. The last remnants of the haunted, frightened woman he had first met in Salt Lake City disappeared completely. In her place was someone confident and radiant, secure in her role as wife and mother, finally believing that she was worth loving. One evening, when James was about 2 months old, Quincy found Katherine sitting outside the cabin with the baby in her arms, watching the sunset. He sat down beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I am thinking about how far we have come," Katherine said. 3 years ago, I was convinced my life was over. I thought I was beyond redemption, beyond hope. And now look at me. I have a husband who loves me, a beautiful son, a home. I have everything I ever wanted but never thought I could have. It is almost overwhelming sometimes." "Do you still think you are not worth it?" Quincy asked gently. Katherine looked at him and smiled. "No," she said, "I do not think that anymore. You have spent the last 1.5 years proving my worth to me, day after day, moment after moment, and I finally believe you. I am worth it. I am worth loving and fighting for and building a life with. It took me a long time to accept that, but I do now." Quincy felt emotion tighten his throat. "That is all I ever wanted to hear. I love you so much, Katherine. You and James are my whole world." "And you are ours," Katherine said. She kissed him softly, and James made a little sound of protest at being squished between them, which made them both laugh. The years that followed were good ones. They expanded the cabin, adding 2 more rooms to accommodate their growing family. A daughter named Margaret arrived 2 years after James, with her mother's green eyes and her father's smile. Then another son, Thomas, 2 years after that. The valley rang with the sounds of children playing and laughing, and the cabin that had once seemed so isolated became filled with warmth and life. Quincy built up a small herd of cattle and some horses, trading with other ranchers in the region to gradually grow their operation. It was hard work, especially in the harsh mountain winters, but it was honest work, and it provided well for his family. Katherine tended her garden and raised their children and made the cabin a home in every sense of the word. As their 10th wedding anniversary approached, Quincy planned something special. He had been saving money for months, and he used it to buy a small gold locket from a traveling merchant. Inside, he placed a tiny photograph of their family that a photographer had taken on a rare trip to town. When he gave it to Katherine on the morning of their anniversary, she cried. "It is beautiful," she said, fastening it around her neck. "I will treasure it always." "I wanted you to have something that reminds you of what we have built together," Quincy said, "of how far we have come." Katherine looked around their home, at their children playing nearby, at the life they had created from nothing but hope and determination. "I do not need a reminder," she said. "I think about it every single day. I think about the night you told me you wanted to spend your life proving I was worth it, and I realize you have done exactly that. You have proved it in every way that matters, and now it is my turn to spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice." "You already have," Quincy said. "From the moment you said yes to me, you have been proving it. We prove it to each other every single day, Katherine. That is what love is." They stood together, holding each other and watching their children play, knowing that they had found something rare and precious. They had found a love that was strong enough to overcome pain and fear and the shadows of the past. They had found a home not in a place but in each other. The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and challenges. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and dreams. James was serious and thoughtful, interested in books and learning. Margaret was spirited and adventurous, always climbing trees and exploring the mountains. Thomas was gentle and kind, with a natural way with animals that reminded Quincy of himself at that age. When James turned 16, he announced that he wanted to go to school in Salt Lake City, to get a proper education and maybe become a teacher like his grandfather had been. Katherine's first instinct was fear that someone would recognize her, that the past would catch up with them after all these years. But Quincy reminded her that she was a different person now, with a different name, and that enough time had passed that no one was likely to remember a case from nearly 2 decades ago. So, they let James go, and he thrived in the city, writing long letters home about his studies and his friends. His success gave Margaret and Thomas ambitions of their own, and the cabin that had once been filled with the sounds of children began to grow quieter as they prepared to make their own ways in the world. Katherine handled the transition better than Quincy expected. She was sad to see her children leave, but she was also proud of them, proud of the confident, capable young people they had become. And she took comfort in the fact that she and Quincy still had each other. "We started this journey together," she said one evening, as they sat on the porch of their cabin, now weathered and aged but still solid. "Just the two of us. And now here we are again, coming full circle. Except this time, we are not running from anything," Quincy said. "We are just living, just being together." "I like that," Katherine said, lacing her fingers through his. "I like that a lot." They were in their 50s now, both of them with silver threading through their hair and lines on their faces earned through years of hard work and laughter. But Quincy still looked at Katherine and saw the beautiful woman he had fallen in love with in that saloon so many years ago. And Katherine still looked at Quincy and saw the man who had saved her, who had given her a reason to believe in herself again. One autumn day, a letter arrived that changed everything. It was from a lawyer in Missouri informing Katherine that new evidence had come to light in the death of Robert Thorne. A neighbor had come forward, years after the fact, testifying that they had witnessed Thorne's brutality toward Katherine and had seen him attack her on the night he died. Based on this testimony and a review of the medical records showing Katherine's injuries, the case had been officially ruled self-defense. Katherine Bailey Thorne was no longer wanted for any crime. Katherine read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking, before she finally believed it was real. "I am free," she whispered. "After all these years, I am finally free." Quincy pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried, tears of relief and release and joy. "You were always free," he told her. "From the moment you left that house, you were free. But I am glad the law finally recognizes that too." "Can we go back?" Katherine asked. "Can we go to Missouri, to my father's grave? I have wanted to visit it for so long, to tell him I am sorry, and that I turned out all right in the end." "Of course we can," Quincy said. "We can go anywhere you want." They made the journey the following spring, traveling by train and stagecoach back to the town where Katherine had grown up. It looked smaller than she remembered, more worn down, but the cemetery was well maintained. She found her father's grave easily, marked with a simple headstone that bore his name and dates. Katherine knelt in the grass and placed wildflowers she had brought from their valley on the grave. "Hello, Papa," she said softly. "I am sorry it took me so long to come back. I am sorry for so many things. I should have listened to you about Robert. You were right about everything. But I want you to know that I am all right now. I found a good man, a man who loves me and treats me the way you always said I deserve to be treated. We have 3 beautiful children, and we have built a good life together. I hope you can forgive me for the mistakes I made. I hope you are proud of who I became." Quincy stood a little distance away, giving her privacy for this moment she had waited so long for. When Katherine finally stood and walked back to him, her eyes were red, but her face was peaceful. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing me here, for giving me closure." "Always," Quincy said. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it. That has not changed and never will." They returned home to their valley, to their cabin and their cattle and the life they had built. Their children visited when they could, bringing grandchildren and stories of their own adventures and successes. The cabin that had once seemed too small for a family of 5 now sometimes overflowed with 3 generations of Carlsons, all talking and laughing and filling the space with love. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Quincy and Katherine renewed their vows, this time with all their children and grandchildren as witnesses. James, now a successful teacher, officiated the ceremony. Margaret, married to a rancher in Wyoming, had traveled with her husband and 4 children to be there. Thomas, who had taken over the family ranch, stood beside his wife and watched his parents with tears in his eyes. 30 years ago, Quincy said, holding Katherine's hands and looking into her eyes, "I made a promise to you. I promised to spend my life proving that you were worth it, that you were valuable and deserving of love. And I hope I have kept that promise." "You have," Katherine said, "every single day. But now I want to make a new promise to you. I promise to spend whatever time we have left showing you how grateful I am. Grateful that you saw past my fears and my pain to the person I could become. Grateful that you loved me when I could not love myself. Grateful that you gave me a family and a home and a reason to wake up smiling every morning. I love you, Quincy Carlson. I have loved you from the moment you paid for those broken glasses. And I will love you until my very last breath." There was not a dry eye in the cabin by the time they finished, and when Quincy and Katherine kissed, their entire family cheered. They lived many more years in their valley, watching their grandchildren grow and welcoming great-grandchildren into the world. The ranch prospered under Thomas's management, and the Carlson name became respected throughout the region for honesty and quality. James published a book about frontier education that was used in schools across the country. Margaret's ranch became one of the largest in Wyoming, but through all the changes in all the years, Quincy and Katherine remained the steady center of the family, the love story that had started it all. They grew old together, their bodies slowing down, but their love never wavering. They still took walks through the meadow, where Quincy had first proposed building their home. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset. They still held hands and shared quiet moments of contentment. When Katherine was 78, she fell ill. It was nothing dramatic, just a gradual fading, her body wearing out after a long and full life. Quincy nursed her tenderly, never leaving her side, holding her hand and telling her stories of their years together. "I am not afraid," Katherine said one evening as the light faded outside. "I had a good life, Quincy, better than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me that. You gave me everything." "You gave it to yourself," Quincy said, his voice thick with emotion. "I just helped you see what was there all along. You were always worth it, Katherine, always." "I know," she said, smiling. "I finally know. Thank you for teaching me that." Katherine passed peacefully in her sleep that night, her hand still clasped in Quincy's. The entire family gathered for her funeral, filling the small church in the nearest town with flowers and tears and stories of a woman who had overcome impossible odds to build a legacy of love. Quincy lived another 3 years after Katherine's death. He missed her terribly, but he found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together. He spent his days sitting on the porch of the cabin, looking out at the valley where he had first brought Katherine all those years ago, remembering every moment they had shared. On what would have been their 52nd wedding anniversary, Quincy did not wake up. He died peacefully in his sleep, and his family knew he had gone to be with Katherine again. They buried him beside her in a small cemetery they had established on their land, overlooking the meadow where their story had truly begun. Years later, their great-great-grandchildren would visit that cemetery and hear the story of Quincy and Katherine. They would hear about a cowboy who saw worth in a woman who thought herself worthless, about a love that was strong enough to overcome the past and build a future, about two people who proved that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is believe in someone else until they learn to believe in themselves. The cabin still stood in the valley, maintained by the Carlson family as a tribute to the couple who had started it all. Inside, above the fireplace, hung a photograph of Quincy and Katherine on their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their family. In the picture, they were both smiling, their hands clasped together, their eyes shining with love and contentment. And if you look closely at the photograph, you could see the gold locket around Katherine's neck, the one Quincy had given her all those years ago. Inside that locket was a picture of their family, a reminder of everything they had built together from nothing but hope and determination, and a love that refused to give up. Their story became part of family legend, passed down through generations. The tale of how Quincy Carlson had walked into a saloon in Salt Lake City one day and found a woman who thought she was not worth saving. How he had spent his life proving her wrong, day after day, moment after moment. How they had run from the law and built a home in the wilderness and raised a family that would go on to touch hundreds of lives. It was a story about redemption and second chances, about finding love in unexpected places and holding on to it no matter what obstacles stood in the way. About two people who saved each other and built something beautiful from the broken pieces of their pasts. And in the end, it was a story about worth, about learning to see value in yourself and in others, about understanding that everyone deserves love and respect and the chance to be happy, no matter what mistakes they have made or what darkness they have survived. Quincy had promised to spend his life proving Katherine's worth to her, and he had kept that promise every single day until his very last breath. But what he never quite realized was that she had done the same for him. She had proved to him that love was worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, worth building a life around. Together, they had created something that would last long after they were gone, a family built on love and acceptance and the unshakable belief that everyone, no matter their past, no matter their mistakes, is worth saving, is worth fighting for, is worth loving with everything you have. That was the legacy of Quincy and Katherine Carlson, and it lived on in every generation that came after them, in every child who learned their story and understood that love, real love, has the power to heal even the deepest wounds and transform even the most broken of souls. Their valley remained a place of peace and beauty, a testament to what two people could build when they refused to give up on each other. And sometimes, in the evening light, people swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand through the meadow, still together, still in love, even after death had parted them, because some loves are strong enough to last forever. Some promises are kept beyond the grave, and some stories, the very best ones, never truly end. They just continue on, passed from one generation to the next, inspiring others to believe in love and hope and the possibility of redemption. Quincy and Katherine's story was one of those stories, and it would be told and retold for as long as there were Carlsons to remember it, a reminder that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is simply to believe in them, to see their worth when they cannot see it themselves, and to love them through every shadow until they finally step into the light. That was what Quincy had done for Katherine, and in doing so, he had given her not just a life worth living, but a love worth dying for. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for than that?